Hello there, my name is Nick Zuccarello, and I would like to show you some of the things that I've discovered when making trim sheets. I was doing modeling inside of Maya. I pushed the results to ZBrush so I could do all the sculpting parts. Then I pushed everything to Substance Painter so I could bake the materials and the textures. And then finally, we're going to push those results into Unreal and then take a look at what everything looks like inside of Unreal. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, here we are inside of ZBrush, and the first thing I wanted to draw to your attention is basically just the setup that we have and what we're trying to accomplish. So if you take a look at the design that I have right here, you see in through this section, and we consider this like a big square, this is really the area that I'm trying to get to tile. So I've got this element in through here that tiles, obviously this crown thing that tiles here. The piece of wood that I chose ends in this area right here. But this section here tiles across here and here. This one goes across here and there. And then I've got two different panels that I've got here. So I basically duplicated this one and then pushed it here. And then I've duplicated this one and I pushed it over here. Because think about the tiling. As we go across this, as soon as it goes out this side, it needs to loop back and then come back through here. So it's just doing this continuous loop. I would say the same thing for this, but I do have two different pieces here and here. Um, actually, no, I did the same thing. So I've got this piece, duplicated it, pushed it here, and I've got this piece, and I duplicated it over here. So I do have repeats of all these different parts and pieces. So this is the basic part of the tile. When I'm done, I can go to the point of actually cutting out like each one of these boards and making individual boards and things like that. And I could cut out elements of this stuff, the crown. Any part on here could be dissected a little bit more, and you could do a whole lot more with things once it's made. But the whole reason why I've got this size of a piece here, and then if you chop that in half, I basically have another half here and here. And that's all just to get our brushes. If we go to the brush menu and you go to curve and then you go to wrap mode, depending on the size that you have for things, if I go ahead and select this part here, and I've got my brush set to wrap mode, I should be able to sculpt across this, and you can see how it's going to tile across this specific area that you have. One thing to watch out for whenever you're working is if you go and I pick one of the Orb's crack brushes, you can see that this wrap mode is per brush. So I do really wish that there was a universal turn this on for all brushes whenever you're doing this workflow, but it's not. So you're going to need to probably keep this brush menu up and keep a good eye on it. So if I know the tile rate works for 2 for this, I could even push this up to 4 and just double the number. And then at that point, I've got more brushes to kind of work with. You will obviously start to see that pattern a whole lot more, but you might actually want that effect in certain situations. You can see that it's also tiling in not only the horizontal area, but it's also tiling in the vertical area too. So that's something to take into consideration. I'll just tell you this real quick. If you want to limit this, masking for ZBrush is a big way of making sure that you're not going to get any brush strokes on any particular area. So I just held down Control and then drug out a marquee there and there. And then now whenever I do that, I can ensure that I'm only going to do this tile wrap mode in that particular area. Okay, so if I turn on my color information for this, maybe this is going to make it a little bit more easy for you to kind of see some of this stuff. I know these are all the same. At least here on the bottom, you can see how I've duplicated this part and pushed it over here. This part is duplicated over here. I actually made the color information for a later part whenever we're doing the baking information, and we can do an ID map. That's just for Substance Painter, and it makes it really easy for us to go through and bake that map out and then get simple color selections for whenever we want to build masking and play with our materials and things like that. So if I take a look at inside of Maya, I wanted to draw your attention to this. This is the geometry that I made for this. If I turn on wireframe on shaded, you can see what I've built for the parts and pieces. The one thing, let's do this. I'm going to select this part and hit Control 1. And you can see what I did. I actually gave thickness to all the parts and pieces that I have on here. And the reason that I did that, and I just hit Control 1 to get back, is I'm going to push those shapes into ZBrush. And I wanted to use Dynamesh as a method of creating my geometry, right? You take a look at this, and I've had tab 3 for smooth mesh preview on that. You can see looks pretty horrible. So that would be what this thing would look like if I was using subdivision levels. Now I could go through and I could crease my edges and hold my edges and things like that. So that's another modeling workflow that you could do. But I just like the flexibility of Dynamesh and not having to worry about holding all these edges. So basically, I'm just pushing these shapes inside a ZBrush, and then I'm converting them to Dynamesh. And then as long as I've got the size and the spacing worked out, I'm ready to go for this, right? So all my verts are snapped up. The other thing is making sure everything is, I'm putting everything on grid spacing and increments. If you're curious about what my grid resolution looks like for that, I can go to display, grid, go to the option box, and this is what I like to use for my spacing and everything and my subdivisions. I do like to know that with these numbers and this setup that I've got, that this is basically a 1 meter tile here, and then this, if you add another one, that's 2 meters in this area, like that. So something else to talk about, I'm going to take these two planes that I made and talk to you about this, that considered texel density. So how many pixels do you have within a certain map or a certain size? And from what I've seen from most modern game engines, it's going to be for every meter, you want a 1024 by 1024 map. So if you're doing 2 meter by 2 meter, then you want a 2048 by 2048. But just something to consider and to think about. With this plane that I've got here, and I just went up here and went to the modeling set and hit a plane. The height width for this is 200 by 200. And so this is a 2 meter by 2 meter block. And then I just duplicated that and I pushed it over. And you can see that this is 1 meter for this distance. So really this tile that I set up is like a 3 meters wide or so, you know? So I don't think there's any hard rule for this. You can kind of play around with scale and things like that, but my idea was to get the Unreal Mannequin in here, have some kind of frame of reference for what the scale would be, and then after I'm done with this tile, I could build out wall structures and things like that, right? So that's something about the size that I built for that. And again, after I took one of these panels like this, you can see I've got thickness to everything. The next part would be making sure that everything exports to ZBrush correctly. And again, you want to take whatever the width of this thing is, you want half the distance, and you want to make sure that that piece that you send over is half the size of that. So I've got half here and I've got half here. That's going to give you that wrap mode setup. Now exporting. ZBrush is not the biggest fan of n-gons. It can try to fix that on import. I probably wouldn't trust it. If I were you, I would probably take any n-gons that you have and you can just triangulate them. That's one way of getting rid of the problem. So like if I select this piece that you have here, I'll show you this. You can go to mesh, and then we'll do cleanup, and we'll do the option box for this, and then we can take a look at some of the options. I'm not a big fan of the default settings on here, which is telling it to try to clean up things and problems. I wanted to just select it, so I'm going to select it. And there's a whole lot that you can do with inside of here. If you wanted to select all the parts that were just quads, you could select that like that. It would select it for you. But the thing that I'm looking for is faces with more than 4 sides. So that's any of our n-gons. So we'll select that just like that. And it's going to give us all the parts and pieces. And then if I hold down shift and then right click, then I can get to triangulate faces. And so now I've just done that for that piece there. You could go through all the different parts and pieces, and you can get that going. And then that way you can push everything over to ZBrush. I was a little bit messy with the shapes. I just cared about getting the shapes going, and then once that was done, then I can just export, and we can get that over to ZBrush. All right, now that I've got all my pieces kind of put together and I've got them triangulated, I'm ready to send that over to ZBrush. Now I could just select this entire folder that I've got, and if I hold down Shift and then click on that, you can see I've got a bunch of groups and things that I use to try to be organized inside of Maya, which is not a bad idea at all to be organized in here. So I basically had this middle section that I was working on, and then I knew I needed half of that, so I just duplicated this 2 other times. So if I collapse this up, you can see I've got 3 chunks, right? The issue is I could either do some organization inside of ZBrush, which I would say is maybe not quite as easy, or I could do it inside of Maya, which I think might be a little bit easier. So I could just take this entire folder structure right here and just duplicate it. I'll move this up. I'll just call this guns I looked at before. I'll hide it, Control H, and then this is the thing I'm going to send to ZBrush, right? So I know that I want to keep this part together. So if I expand that again, I don't really need to do that right now, but I'll just go Mesh, Combine, and then I want to call this Crown. Eventually this will be Crown High. I'm going to make this into a high-res mesh, and this is my wall. So I'll go to Mesh, Combine, call that a wall, or high, like that. And I've got my panels. So I will go to Mesh Combine, just like we did before. I'm going to delete history, Alt Shift D, delete history on that. I really shouldn't have things, so I should delete that. So I got panels already written in there. Not the best at typing, so let's just take that, call that panels high. And then I've got this, and I was considering these baseboards, but I'll just call them base. So I'll combine that together, call this base high, like that. I'm just going to select all these and still say this is my thing that I'm going to send to ZBrush. I don't need any of those empty groups anymore. Now, if you've got some weird transform stuff left over, this is where deleting your history is kind of important, because if you ever delete this folder structure and then you see like your parts just disappear and stuff, Maya is notorious for doing some weird stuff like that. Again, just make sure you delete your history on things. Okay. So I'm just saving that real quick. So now I can take these things and I can send it on over to ZBrush. Now, what I've found is that if I use FBX as my file type and I pull that into ZBrush, it's a nice option because it's going to retain the parts and it's going to retain the naming conventions that I set up inside of Maya. So that could be useful for you. So I'm just going to select this folder group. I could select this whole thing, or you can select this, hold down Shift and do that. It's easier to probably do the folder group thing. So I'll just say File, Export Selection, and I'll do this. I'll go ahead and export selection. And then I do need to navigate real quick to a location here and here like this. Go to my FBX, and then I've got let's just folder and do ZBrush like that. Call this wall tile and do ZBrush like that. Okay. This matters a little bit more for Unreal and everything, but I usually have smoothing groups on, tangents, binormals, smooth. Doesn't really matter for ZBrush. I'll spit that out. and I'm going to go over to ZBrush real quick. And what I like to do is if I hit the command key, if I load up the light box, if I go to projects, I like to use this Dynasphere 128 and just load that up and let it do its thing. Gives us this nice gray sphere and gives us the grid, puts it in perspective, and fills the canvas. It does all kinds of nice. Okay. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to import my parts in. I'm going to click import, and then I need to navigate to where we're at for that. And I'm going to go to FBX and find this and hit open and hit OK. And you can see it's going to go through and it should set up everything for us, just like we had. Just like I was saying, it's going to give us the naming convention and everything else like that. Doesn't do it alphabetically, so I'm not really sure what that is about. But if we want to be consistent, we could maybe just reorganize this stuff a little bit like that. The next thing I would like to do is make a new folder and just call this wall tile. This will just give us more options later. And then I can just click and drag this stuff in there into that folder. And then now I'm nice and organized with it. Okay. All right. So if you wanted to hold on to all this stuff and always have this as a frame of reference before you do anything to it, you could leave this whole thing alone. And maybe what I could do is I could go to this gearbox icon for the folder. Wait, this is the wrong spot. Sorry. We'll go to the Z plugin area, and let me just open this up. I'm going to double click on this, and I will take the Z plugin area, click this icon, and then drag it over here. What I was going to look at is Subtool Master has a thing in here for folders where you can copy the folder right here like that. And if I go to like another object like this polysphere or something like that, then I can paste folder. It'll paste it in here. So I've just kind of just moved everything over, and now I can delete this this sphere here. But it's a nice way of being able to move things around. There's probably some other options that you could do that. But then now I've got two different versions. I've got the original import, and then now I've got this thing that we see here. So I'm just going to go to the crown, and if we do this, if I hold down Control Shift and I drag a marquee over this, this is going to control visibility. So anything inside this box, it'll be visible. And then there's a hotkey trick inside of ZBrush. If you do Control Shift A, that'll grow your visibility for whatever is an island. I just wanted to make sure you knew that we have islands on things, right? So an island, it's this self-contained piece of geometry, right? It's not connected to this, so they are separate parts. Now, if I wanted to put polygroups on this, what I can do is go down here to the polygroups area, and then I could do auto groups, and it's going to take a look at the islands that are on the model there, and it'll set up something like that. If I hold down Alt, I can click on another part in the viewport like this. And I'm just going to click auto groups on this, hold down Alt, click there, and then put on auto groups. I do have my polyframe on, so we're seeing what's happening right now. And I'll do auto groups for this as well. And so now I've got my different shapes. Okay. And then the next part would be us converting this into Dynamesh, which let's go to geometry. And then we've got Dynamesh right here. It's off by default. I'm just going to take a wild guess here, and I'm going to put 1200 for this. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so I can see some of the quality of what we're going to get when we do this. And then I'm going to click Dynamesh and see what it gives us. Okay. I'm going to turn off the polyframe so I can take a look at it. And I think it looks, pretty good for that. So I think that's going to be a decent resolution for this. I'll hold down Alt and then click on that. Again, per object, you might have to set that. So we got 1200. Let's click Dynamesh for that. A little bit longer on that one. Go ahead and do this. On these, if I wanted these to be separate, here's just something to note that we've got this as a possibility. If I click Dynamesh on this part, and if I click the resolution, put it back to 1200, If I Dynamesh it, it will merge everything together as one big giant object, right? Currently, we have with these polygroups, Control Shift click on this, you can see we've got different pieces like that. They do have a thing within Dynamesh to where if I wanted to keep the groups on here, I could Dynamesh it, still keeps it as one object, but it'll keep the group information. So when it Dynameshes, it will treat these as if they're separate objects. Cool option. So we turn on groups, click Dynamesh, do that. You can see it's converted it over for us. Now if we hold on Control Shift and we click on this, just like I was saying, it's going to keep this as a solid object. So that's a really nice option if you want to keep these actually separate. And what I needed to do for that whenever I was done was actually duplicating this and moving it here and duplicating this and moving it here. So probably a good option for me on that one. But when I got down to this part here, I recognized that I actually didn't split this middle part into two separate objects. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to show you how you can update the art in here. I know that I showed you how to use an FBX to get everything in and it retained the naming conventions and everything. And that was very convenient for us. But there are times where you might need to update UVs or things like that and then re-import and import over a particular object. In order to do that, we need to use an OBJ. So let's hop on over to Maya. And what I did already was take these parts, and if I do an isolate select with Control 1, you can see that I've got these as individual objects. The other thing I wanted to show you is that it's possible to build polygroups inside of Maya and get that information to come over to ZBrush as well. So in order to do that, I just right-click and selected my faces, or you can hit F11, double-click on that, and then I needed to build a set for this. You can see I've already done it. But it's really easy. You just select your faces, you go create, and there's sets, and then you can do the set option box thing. That's one way that you can do it. I really don't know why they've got this quick selection set. It's very similar, whatever. I guess you've got a few more options on here. So either way, you can make a set. After you've done it once, I just double clicked it again, and I tapped G for last command. I just gave it a very simple name like that. You can actually name that. The selection set names don't matter inside of ZBrush, but they will come over and separate the parts and pieces. Okay, so I'm going to select this object, and then I'm going to say File, Export Selection. I'm going to do the option box, and then this time I'm going to use OBJ as my export type. And then I did have a problem with this. I'm not sure why this was off, but I needed to make sure that groups was turned on. That's the sets part. And there's other options for you too. You could, if you've got materials on there, there's some options in ZBrush under preferences to be able to import materials as polygroups. So that's a possibility too. The smoothing and the normals gives you your normal information, but ZBrush doesn't really respect that. So I'll say export selection, and I'll export over this file that I've got here. I'll replace it. And then I'll hop on over to ZBrush. Then now I'm going to use their import options. And I'm going to go find this OBJ. And again, with an OBJ, it's going to replace whatever that current subtool that you have selected is. And hit open. And you can see here, now it's imported this new object. They're separate pieces like we just did inside of Maya. And they've got different polygroups on it. Now, if you re-import over the top of itself again, it will re-import the model. I'm surprised it actually didn't change the polygroup colors. So sometimes you might get a change in the polygroup colors. No big deal for that, right? If we hold on Control Shift, click on this, and if you hit Control W for your polygroup information, you can keep spamming that to change the colors if you want to change the colors on things. Control Shift click to bring everything back. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is do what we did before. We are going to get this piece and we are going to Dynamesh it. So I'm going to go to Geometry. I'm going to go to Dynamesh. We had that on 1200, that right there. And I did have groups turned on this so I can get that as a group. We'll go ahead and click Dynamesh and we should be good to go. We've got a very similar situation like what we've got up here. Okay. So the next part that I want to show you is about a situation like this where I told you I want this object and I need to duplicate it at the end and then set it over here. I need a duplicate of this object, and I need to set it over here. What we could use inside of ZBrush is called an array. And an array is going to make basically an instance of something, and we can do a whole lot with it. You can translate it, you can rotate it, you can scale it, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. But for a very simple thing like what we're doing, we just need a duplicate of this, and we need it to move over a certain distance for things. Okay. So I don't need this end piece that we've got here. So the polygroup information, if you don't want to see the line on here, you can just turn off the wireframe so you can just see the groups with the color information. That might be a little bit easier to kind of take a look at stuff. Control Shift click on something will isolate just that part. If you hold down Control Shift and then you click on it again, it will give you the inverse. And if I want to start taking away from the visibility of things, holding down Control Shift and then click on the next polygroup, and it starts to remove that. So I just hid those two pieces that we have there. And then the next thing I want to do is there's a delete hidden. On this one, I did notice the button path. If I hold Control over the top of it, it says Tool Geometry Delete Hidden. That's actually do here. It's actually under this geometry area, and it's under modified topology, and then they've got delete hidden there. So I don't know why this menu, for whatever reason, doesn't pick up this modified topology sometimes. So there. So we got those deleted, right? Okay. Now, in order for us to have a duplicate of this thing the way that I am expecting, we need these two objects to actually be separate from each other. I'd like to keep this organized in through here. I really wish I could have folders that are nested with inside of folders, but at the time of the making of this video, that's not possible. So I can select my object and I can say new folder, and I will just call this base like this. You can see how it's going to make a new folder, but it will kick it out like that, right? Because I've got polygroups on here, there's a bunch of different ways that we can split things. So if I hold down Control Shift and I click on that and I hide the visibility of this piece right here, I can go to the subtool area, and within the subtool area, there's a split. And I can do split hidden. That's one option that I could do, and then that would split these two pieces. I'm not going to do it yet because splitting is a destructive process inside of ZBrush, and it will not let you undo to get back to the point before split, at least at the time of the making of this video. It'd be cool in the future if that has changed, but as of right now, it doesn't work that way. So I can hold down Control Shift and bring everything back for visibility. There's another option too that you can do group splits, and because we've got polygroups, it will split this into two different polygroups. So with these two pieces, not that big of a deal for these options, but as you've got a lot more pieces, maybe that becomes a little bit more important to you. So I am just going to use the group splits, and I'll call this one base, maybe V1 for version 1, and then rename this one base V2, like that. Okay. So now we got our object here, and like I was saying, I'm going to turn this thing into an array. So if I want to use the array, there's a whole section for array mesh, and we can open this up. Now, if you ever want, more parts of your menu to be open all at the same time, you can hold down Shift and you can click this, and it'll open this one along with this one. Because normally, if I just go to array mesh, it closes everything else up and then just opens that. So there's some more options for you for the interface to play around with. So this is really easy. I'm going to click array mesh, and I want my repeat set to, let's go back to this to 2. Then I'll take this offset and I can move it over, and it looks like a value of 4 is going to give me the distance that I need for that. Okay. So instead of sitting there trying to figure out exactly what that number is, I think in the offset, I can do it in either X, Y, or Z. So it's possible to do it in multiple dimensions if you want to. We can do it that way. Okay. And I'll do the same thing on here. If I hold down Alt, I'll click on that. So then that way I don't have to go into the subtool place and actually select it. It's a way of visually just selecting things, holding down Alt like that. Okay. So again, I'm going to do another array on this. So I'll go to the array mesh. I'll click array mesh. And then this time for the offset, I'll do -4. So just type in -4, you should be good to go. Okay. So if I tap 4, that's my hotkey for my move brush. If I do that, you can see I've got a duplicate of that. So pretty cool for that. All right. So I should actually do the same thing for this piece up here. That would be smart of me to do that. So I can just hold down Control Shift, click on that. Control Shift, click on this. That hides the visibility. Already looked at that, right? Geometry, remember modify topology. We'll click delete hidden. Then this time, before I split apart these pieces, I want this to be in a folder. Then I can just make a new folder. I'll call this panels. That. And my panels are in the right position, but if I ever want to redrag these folders and change the order, that's a possibility to do as well. And then I'm just going to change the name of this to panels version 1, like this, just already to have the name. And then I'm going to say group split on this one. That, okay? And then now I've got a panels version 1 and 2. And if I want to be really, really picky about this, this is just me, I would like this to be panels version 1 and this one to be panels version 2. It's not going to like it if you give it the same name, so I'm just going to do that for just a second and then click this one, hit rename, do panels version 1, and click this and say rename panels version, okay, rename it panels version 2, so I got to hit the arrow key, then get rid of that. So now I'm good to go on that. And then I will take this one and then I will go back to the array mesh. Let's go click array mesh. And then we've already learned that we need this to be a value of 4. And if I hold down Alt and click on this one, turn on array mesh, we need this one to be a value of -4. And we are good to go and we're all set up and we should be able to have some cool options for doing everything that we need to do. Okay, so that was everything that we need to do to get everything set up inside of ZBrush as far as being able to sculpt on these pieces and work with them. Let's take a look just real quick at the next part, which would be setting up the wrap mode for actually sculpting on this. Okay, so for this, I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to click on the wall piece. And I'll choose any one of the brushes. Like I was showing you as an example before, I am going to tap B and then O and then R for me. I put the orb brush set. If I tap B, I put all the orb brush set brushes in there. You can put your own brushes in there. The only issue with this is I'm pretty picky about this. I use a different method where I put everything basically through Lightbox and I load all the stuff that I need through Lightbox because I have noticed that if you overload putting too much stuff in the native program as it opens up, you might run the possibility of default brushes not being able to load up. So just something to note there for that. Okay. So yours probably does not have the orb brush, but it doesn't because it doesn't exist there. I added it just so you know. So on this one, I'm going to do BOR. Like I said, for that, we also took a look at it with our brush. We need to make sure that our wrap mode per brush is actually set to this special wrap mode. Okay, so everything is working now at this point. The other cool thing is with the lazy mouse, even with the wrap mode turned on, if you click and hold down Shift and you drag out, you can drag straight lines too. That's a possibility for you to be able to do that type of work as well. Yeah, so nothing too crazy, I would say that I did with this. It's going to be a matter of working with it like a sculpt, like any other thing that you do, and you really got to just have this thing open. Be very aware that this wrap mode needs to be turned on for all your brushes, and if you're not paying attention to that, you run the risk of having your model not tile correctly. So you'll probably not notice that until a little bit later, until you do your baking. So just keep a good eye on that and check that, and make sure that that's always working for you. I wanted to expand on the wrap mode just a little bit more. It works for just about every brush type except for insert mesh brushes. And I wanted to show you that I worked to make really clean shapes for these nail heads on the boards, and I wanted to use insert mesh brushes for that. So I made a brush like this. If you've never used an insert mesh brush before, you can make a model and orient it this way towards the camera, like it's coming out towards you. You just tap B and then go create insert mesh brush, and you can create a new one. It'll ask you if you want to create a new brush or you want to append. So I'll just say new for that. And if you've got multiple versions of this, just like this, if I did a alternate version, do something like this, just move it in that. And then I do the same thing with this one, and I tap B, and then I create insert mesh brush. I can append it, and if I hit OK, you can see now it's going to have two brushes that sit within here, like this, right? And I can do these two different types. And then under brush, if we go to the depth, we can actually tell it how far do we want to embed it into the surface, like this, or do you want it to sit above the surface when you drag out like that. So pretty simple thing. This is what I end up building for those nail heads, something like that, and chose the right depth for it to, I don't know, that. And then what I discovered through this process is that even though we can have this brush on and we go to curve and we go to wrap mode, if we go to use the wrap mode for this, not going to actually respect that information for. So I want to show you what I did to resolve that. Okay. So if you're using insert mesh brushes, one thing that you can do, you want to have them all be the same size, you can control your brush size. You can click and drag out and then hold down control, and it'll always be the same size when you hold down control and drag those out. So I knew that would work, and I had to figure out what's going to be the right size for this, and I'll go a little bit larger than what I've got currently. I'll make it easier to see. So let's just say I wanted to add some decorative elements like this on here. And I was already telling you that I have, I already have things laid out for this one, and I have something different for this one. So maybe on this one, I'll just do a pattern like this. That's just different than the other one, just to make it obvious. And then maybe on here, I've got one here, and I've got here and here, that. Yeah, so I think you get the point. I'll just go ahead and I'll even make these red. So the other thing I can do is if I've got these polygroups that it's going to make for me, I'll just turn on polygroups right there like that. I actually had polygroups on the insert mesh brushes. It will respect that, but we were taking a look earlier. If we hold on Control Shift and drag out on the visibility on something, you can hit Control Shift A and it'll grow out the visibility of everything that is on an island. So maybe what I got to do is do this, Control Shift, then add Alt to take away the visibility of this. Just get some chunk of each one of these. Like that, and then I'll hold down Control Shift, do the inverse, and then do Control Shift A to grow this out. Still missing this, and now I can just click on that. I was just trying to get those separate visibly. Control Shift drag like this does the inverse, and then now I've got these separate like that. I could hit Control W, just make a polygroup out of the whole entire thing now at that point, and then I could use the two different methods of splitting that we talked about. So I could split hidden, or we could use group splits. Either one you want to use is completely fine. Okay, now that I've got them separated out, the one thing that's kind of cool is these insert mesh brushes only work on meshes that don't have subdivision levels. That's one thing to consider. Um, the other thing to consider is whenever you drag out on this, like this, it masks everything. So if you have just one of them that you drag out, we could use that split again, but this time we could use split unmasked points, and then it would split that off into its own thing. And then from there, even though we're looking at this model and we can continue to drag out on it, as long as we have this selected as the model that we have selected in our subtools, we can continue to drag out copies of these. So that's a nice way of getting everything kind of separate. You just saw that other method that I used. I drug out a bunch of them, then got them separate. But if you want to go back and add a little bit more, I could go back to this version that's separate now. And if I just start dragging out a few more, you can see that works. And it's adding it to this group of insert mesh brushes. So at that point, we can keep our models separate like that. Okay, so that's how you can kind of drag it out. But then what about actually making the tile correct for that? Well, if you put it in the move brush, and I'm just going to, or sorry, not the move brush, the transpose tool that they've got. I'm going to put it on there, and then they've got these different icons. If I hold down Alt, this will go to the center of the unmasked points, and if I hold down Alt, this will go to the home button, and if I hold down Alt, this will reset the orientation of the brush. I'm just going to hold down Alt, go to the home button, and then hold down Alt, and then just refresh like that, just to make sure my cursor is nice and straight. All I'm going to do is really move this across like that. Now, if you have a model that doesn't have any subdivision levels on it, and I don't have a mask on anything right now, if I hold down Control and then drag out, it'll drag out a copy of things. And if I hold down Shift, I should be able to move an increment over. And you see that whole number 1 now at that point. So I just drug out a copy of things there. And then what I could do now is I could mask everything. So I could mask this section here and then control dragging. And if I want to inverse that mask, just control tap. The other thing that we could do is hold on control and then add the alt modifier to it, and it would mask everything else outside of that box and then give this to us here. Now at that point, I can just hold down shift and I could drag these models over right here to a -2. And so what I've just built now at that point is insert mesh brushes that are actually tiling in this direction and tiling in this direction as well. So that's what I did for all these little bolt heads that I have. And I'll show you in just a second. We will take a look at adding Polypaint data to our model. So then that way, whenever we send our model over to Substance Painter, we can make an ID map, and it'll make it really easy for us to fill those colored parts with new materials and colors and everything else like that. It just makes it really easy to make masking. Okay. I'd like to talk to you now about using Polypaint data and adding some very simple colors to your model and how we can get that exported from ZBrush and make sure that that follows through with our model for Substance Painter whenever we use our high-res meshes for baking. So I think by the color patterns you can see here, there's nothing really exciting or crazy kind of going on with any of this. If I take a look at this, I will just put my brush on a regular brush, and let me turn off polyframe so you can see exactly what's going on with the color information. My suggestion to you would be at the very beginning, if you go to color, and I just might as well go ahead and click and drag and dock this over. And again, you can just double click on this and open up this trough area, and then you can go to color and then click and drag to get that to go over. It's possible to work with these whole numbers like this. So 255 by 255, 255 by 0 by 0, and that'll give you pure red. Then you can go 0, 255 like this, and that'll give you green, 0, 255. I think you get the point. And then after you do those three, then I would add 255, 255, put this on 0. and get that color. Why I'm suggesting you do this is because this will make it very easy on Substance Painter to actually build masks from these colors. If you've got two colors that are way too similar to each other, then it'll still probably work, but you might get some weird bleed and some stuff like that. So I would try to use as many colors like this as you possibly can, and then the last combo for this would be 255 on that one. So I'd probably start off with those colors first, and then if you need additional colors, then you can obviously you can pick whatever you want. I would just try to stay a little bit different from each other, right? The other thing that I was trying to think of is these colors mean something. So this red was my overall wood that I want in the middle of this. This blue ended up being more like this steel color. The green ended up being a gold. And then for the rest of them, I just wanted to get basically shape separation. And I was just telling you just a second ago about using these insert mesh brushes and then being able to give them all this neutral gray color, and it made it really easy to be able to select that, make a mask for it, and then make a material type that's just like these metal for the nails on there. Okay. The other thing is, if I really wanted these things to be separate, I've got this as a color, and I've got this. Oops, sorry. Let me hold on Alt and click on that. There we go. If I select that, obviously it's going to make these two shapes like I just did here. But probably what I should do on here is I've got this, the same color as this. This color picker works in this mode where you can click and drag out into any of these and it will actually pick off of something that you've got a color for. So I'm just going to select this, this bluish color that I've got right here. And I'm going to just hide that part. And then maybe, like I said, if I get this too close, it's gonna have trouble maybe picking this up. So once it's been filled with Polypaint data, you can see if I turn RGB on for the intensity and set that to 100%, then whatever the color is for that thing, I can say fill object. And then this is where Polypaint comes in handy. I don't think that's much. I would like more of a difference there. So that's why I'm gonna just change that one right there like that. So I could select this here, then maybe I go to maybe more of a tan color. I know this stuff will look ugly, but the look of it doesn't really matter. Sometimes you might hear these things referred to as a clown pass or something like that, right? So I'm going to select this one, and then maybe I'll go like a lighter blue there, something like that. And on this one, maybe I'll select my red and then try to get more of a pink color. That. Okay, so now I've got everything separated. You can see I didn't really use it that to my advantage when I was doing some of the painting, that all this was the same. But again, if I wanted to get some separation between this part and this part, I just already had the poly groups there for it. So why not use that to my advantage? Even if you don't use it, maybe you can fill some of that stuff, and later, if it comes in handy for you, go ahead and do it. Okay, so exporting out, not a big deal. I'm gonna select this part and show you. I separated it out into this chunk here, this whole thing here, and this whole thing here. Okay, and we've already talked about the pattern and getting that going. I I just let the computer do its thing and I just spit these things out. I did merge this whole thing together and I took a look at it. And I think I had 20 million polygons for the totality of the entire object. Now, if I wanted to see like what's the polygon count for each one of these pieces, we could see the polys on this. So I don't know if it matters if I hover over the top of that. Um, so it looks like a little over 2 million for just that. these numbers seem pretty crazy. They used to be crazy, but yeah, computers seem to be handling that. If I go to this part and take a look, so for this, I've got like 13 million for that part. Um, so again, what I saw was I think it was like 22 million for the entire thing. So if you need to help your computer out, there is this plugin called Decimation Master, and you probably heard of it, but I'll just at least explain it real quick, just in case. And also, if you want to get this color data out, so let me select just this part right here. For Decimation Master to work, it's going to poly reduce your model. And in order to get it to do its thing, it's pretty cool. You got to do this pre-process current, and it has to think for a little bit. It makes a file, and then after that, you can interactively change these numbers and then see like what it looks like. So it's really, really nice. Now, if you've got UVs on your model, you're going to want to click this before you pre-process, and that'll hold your UVs. And if you've got Polypaint, you need to hold that with this here. So I'm just going to click pre-process current. Obviously, depending on the size of your mesh, that's going to control how long this process takes for it to make its special file that it does off in the background somewhere. And yeah, so this should go pretty quick right in through here. So while it's doing its thing, after it's done, what I'll say is that you can do this percentage of decimation. So if, let's say it's a million polys and you said you put this percentage of decimation 50%, then you got 500,000, right? I would rather do this K polys. So I know if I put 1,000 in there, that's going to be a model that's right around 1,000,000 polygons, right? And if you put 2,000, then at that point, you've got having trouble just seeing how far that is. Okay, 2,000, that'll be 2,000,000 polys, right? Usually from most of the stuff that I've seen pushing into Maya and things like that, 1,000,000 polygons does pretty good. So I can go ahead and click decimate current, just like that. And if you turn on the polyframe and you turn on the wireframe for things, that line, you can see how it's going to decimate and it's going to hold detail and everything else like that. So it does a really nice job. You could kick that out as a model. And then because this is still live like this, you could go and say, I can put this on 10K for a 10,000 poly model, and then I'll decimate current. And you can see it still does a pretty good job of holding the shape and giving you all the detail and everything else like that. So usually you want to build like decent topology for your models and things, but sometimes if you're doing shapes like rocks or whatever, or you really want to get a model that really represents things like this, I know this wouldn't look good on a portfolio or anything else like that for showing off your ability to make good topology. But you could add UVs to these things and bake that, and then you would have a model that's pretty reasonable, and then you get the silhouette and everything else like that. So just something to think about and to take into consideration for this. Okay. So this is everything that I use for exporting out and getting everything ready. The export options on this, if you set it to FBX, let me tell you something about this, and I'll just throw this real quick, just so I can get to the options about this. So it is possible with the FBX. You can export just the selected model that you see. If you've got multiple subtools visible, you could click on visible and it will export out all the visible subtools. And then you can also use all, and it will export out all your different subtools that you see. So in this workflow, I would suggest doing the selected. The other thing to note is for baking purposes inside of Substance Painter, if I want to have the ability to not explode my mesh and use baking methods by mesh name. So let's say I've got my lower part and it's crown underscore low. And then I've got this one and you can see it's crown underscore high. If I tell Substance Painter to follow this naming convention for baking, it will respect only just that part, and I don't have to worry about giving separation between my parts and things like that. So out of best practices, I would say try to make sure you've got matching high res to low res parts, and you would be exporting out these models one at a time like this with the selected. Okay. The other thing to note is that you've got this smooth normals enabled. And ZBrush does not show you in the program, there's no such thing as smooth shading on the normals, at least at the time of the making of this video. So if you notice that you're getting softer results and you don't really quite know exactly what's going on with that, you might want to check this smooth normals off. That will export the thing out with all hard edge normals, but you're going to get a much closer one-to-one representation from what you have inside of ZBrush to your baking part, right? I've just been keeping that on. I haven't been decimating, so I've just been sending it out. It's super high res data, so that's been working for me. There's some other options in there too, but I think that's all you really need for this current part. Okay, so all the different parts needed to be exported out this way, like that. And then I did have folder groups for things. I've got some build files in there that are hidden. And then you can see this is the final files that I kind of merged together and everything to get everything exported out. So I think that's going to give you the information that you need about your high-res meshes, getting the color data on there and getting that information out and getting it in a format that you're able to start baking your maps with. So what I'd like to talk to you now about is everything that I had to do with my game res mesh that I made. This is something that I did special to uh, use for baking purposes. And then when I'm done with this mesh later, I would turn this into the final game res mesh and then have everything set up in order for us to use this, trim pieces and everything else like that. But so what I have is very similar to what we looked at before. I just deleted off all the back geometry. You remember I gave thickness to everything so I could pull that inside of ZBrush and then do Dynamesh. For this baking stuff, I don't need any of that on the back of there, unless you're going to actually make 3D geometry that's going to go into your world. Then obviously, then at that point, you got to account for that geometry and everything else like that. But the way that I like to think of this is think about the Hollywood facade, right? If the camera doesn't see it, you don't really need to build it, right? So if you went onto a Hollywood set and you went into some building, you would look on the back of it, and it's just a bunch of 2x4s and everything holding the wall up, and you would be very disappointed. All make believe. Same thing for games, right? So the only thing we need is these outside surfaces. I will say through the process of sculpting, my shapes did change quite a bit, and when I was going to do some baking in Painter, I was getting some weird results, and it took me a while to figure out that I needed to refit my parts and pieces to my high res mesh. So I actually went into ZBrush and I exported everything out and I brought it into the program like this. So everything that you saw over here, like this, to do a merge visible, that's pretty easy. You're just going to go to merge and then you do merge visible. And then whenever you do that, then it's going to give you this, it's called merged at the beginning of it. So it'll kick out this mesh. And to make things easier on Maya, I didn't need 22 million polygons to check that out. Just like we looked at before, I used the decimation on that and then I spit that mesh out and then imported it into Maya. The next thing I did, I took that mesh and I don't have it selected because it's on a reference layer right now. So I can turn that on and off and I set it to reference. Now I can actually select it. If you've never made layers inside of Maya before, that's pretty simple. You can select something and then if it's selected, you click this button right here in the layers area and then you can give it a name. I just called it the final sculpt layer. And then you could either have it set to template, reference, and reference means you can see it, you just can't touch it. And then you can turn that off and you've got full control to be able to do what you normally do with your models. But I want that on reference, and then after it's on reference, then I can just turn on and off the visibility of that. Okay, so I can't select it right now. I'm going to give myself the ability to select it. And then if you've got it in object mode, remember F8 can toggle back and forth between object mode, or you can right click on here and go to object mode that way. So I'm in object mode. and then I just right click and I can say assign favorite material, and I just used a blend. I don't need any kind of shading on this. I just want this thing to be red. I hit Control A to bring up the attribute editor. You can see after it's got this material assigned to it, I just took this and then assigned a red color to it. And I was good to go for that. So I'll put that back on reference like that. So that gave me a frame of reference to take a look at. And basically what I had with this situation was when I first initially made my shapes, they were actually kind of moved back a little bit further and everything else like that. And so when we start talking about a search depth for the baking purposes, I had to make a super, super high number to actually get it to pick up all the details on there. And that was becoming problematic for me. So what I did, and you might have to do this as well, after you're done with the sculpting process, take a look at your meshes and make sure that they are as close to each other as you possibly can get them to be. Okay. I think that's going to help you with the baking process. Okay, I'll turn that off. If I select this and I open it up, what I ended up having, and I was talking to you about this a little bit earlier, for each one of these pieces, I've got a crown underscore low. Now, the uppercase of this does matter. I changed it. Substance Painter, the default is just a lowercase L. So if you don't want to have to change that, just do underscore low for all your pieces. So I've got 4 different chunks that I did. We've already looked at those different chunks inside of ZBrush. Now I can export this entire thing out, even though they're separate. I can export this entire thing out as an FBX, as one FBX. The naming conventions for Substance Painter looks at these actual individual parts and pieces and what their names are, like this, okay? So it doesn't matter what you export it at, it's what's named in the program. Now over in ZBrush, similar thing. If I select this, I need to have this thing say crown high, wall high, and then on this I've got my panels high, and then on this I call this base high. And what matters for ZBrush, whenever you export this out, just like Maya, it doesn't matter what the name was. Whenever you exported it out for the FBX file or OBJ, what it looks at is what's the name here in the subtool area. And so those areas need to match, okay? I know we're not quite there yet with the baking process, but you need to understand that that's how Substance Painter is going to be able to do the baking where it's matching by mesh name. The old method was exploding your meshes. I'm going to give this a go. Let's see. If I do this expose thing or whatever, it would be a similar thing where you had to take all your meshes and you had to move them very far apart from each other. Then you had to manage high-res parts that were moved in a different location, low-res parts that were moved in a location, like just kind of messy, right? So they changed it to do this thing where you can actually call the meshes by their name, and as long as you have a low and a high res part matching, it will respect that. Okay, so there's the parts for the mesh names. Okay, if you take a look at the geometry that I made, you remember what we did for our tiles in ZBrush. It needed to be a very specific length in order for us to get the tiles to actually behave the way that we wanted, right? So we had to take whatever that chunk was, divide it in half, and then push it over here, and then push it over here. So when I'm going into substance, you can see it doesn't quite match up, right? So here's my final sculpt. Let me turn off the wireframe on shaded so that it doesn't look so horrible. And then you can see I didn't, to do the baking process, I don't need that much. I just need some sort of bleed on here. So I could have just even chopped off probably about that much and I would have been fine. No big deal. I just chose to push it out to about this far. I think it looks pretty pleasing to the eye and kind of gives you a little bit of an idea what's going to happen with the tile and everything else like that. So I think that part is completely up to you, whatever you want to do with it. Okay. Let me tell you about the UVs. If I pull up the UV editor window and I'll push this over here. So I made a previous video that was talking about setting up tiling textures and getting those to bake. And we did talk about the UV and the special bake setup for that. This is very, very similar. On that video, it needed to make sure it's tiling vertically and horizontally. On this thing, we only need it to tile in this direction here, okay? So I'm going to recreate basically how to make this section here. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all this, just delete it away. like that. And I don't want symmetry on for now, just to show you everything that's kind of going on. Okay. So let's just say this was the chunk of the wall that I did. If I go to, I'm going to go back to faces. If we want to go to faces like this, and then I am going to do UVs, and I'll do a planar map, and I'll do a planar map from the x-axis. So we take a look here. That's just going to take a planar map and just push it straight through like that. Okay. So I'll hit apply. You can see it's going to give us this. Now, if we put the checkered texture on here so we can actually see what's going on, everything looks good except for we might have some areas where it's red. That means that texture is just pushed straight through on there, right? And normally you would probably just take your model, you can right click over it, go to UVs, select it, go to unfold, and you can unfold it like that. But you saw this weird little shift and you might have to fix things up on there. Let me turn off the checkered texture so you can see that and make that a little bit easier to see. Okay, I'm going to hit undo to get back to that. Now, what you can do is that you can unfold along an axis here in U or V. So if I hit that and I just click unfold along V, I've got that going. Now I know for me, if I wanted to check this along with the other pieces that I have, I needed to actually select the other pieces, and we can see those in the UV window. And then now that gives us an idea of like, hey, this thing is not going to fit in there, and I need to squish this down. So what I'm doing to the model right now with scaling the UVs, that is probably doing some stretching, but I want to get as many pixels on this thing as I possibly can. So I'm not super concerned about it. I am going to give a little bit of bleed in between my parts and pieces. This is something else that I wanted to point out to you that was causing me not to be able to have my model be imported into Substance Painter. It kept throwing up these errors, and it kept saying that I had a UV that was outside the 0 to 1 range. It doesn't really exactly say that, but you had to go in the error, and I finally figured out I'm going to exaggerate the problem, right? So that doesn't even seem like much, but it's outside the 0 to 1 range. And I think what I ended up having was the distance that it was outside the 0 to 1 range was like so minuscule. It was very difficult to even see that that was problematic. What you can do is select your UVs, and you can actually hold down X, and you can move them, and you can snap them to your grid. So I set up my grid increments, and if you look at view, go to grid, go to the option box for the grid. If you want to know the settings that I have for my grid, here's the numbers that I'm using for everything. You don't have to use those numbers. It's just they're there for you if you want to take a look at them. Okay. So it's just like snapping geometry up. So if I had this situation where maybe I had a few of them like this, I could just grab this whole row, hold down X, and then just snap along there. And then if you are going to snap to the edges of your UV border, please do this. You're going to save yourself some time and headache. It took me a while to figure out like why was that happening. Like I said, it was so small. It was very difficult to see. You can see I've got some overlapping UVs on these other parts, and I'm going to show you now, after we've got our UVs set up for this section, what needs to happen in this case. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control D, and that will duplicate, and I'm going to hold down X. I've got my grid turned on, and if you want to see my grid settings that I've got, let's go here, display grid in the option box. So here's the numbers I have for my grid. You could use those numbers too if you want. This seems to work pretty well for me and what my needs are and using Unreal. And now I can hold down X, and I can click and I can drag this over like this. And I'm going to hit Control D, hold down X, and I'm going to drag on this side. Okay. So now I need to hit F11, select my faces, and I can just get rid of the faces that I don't want anymore on this side. And I don't, grabbing things. There we go. And I don't want the polys on that side. Okay. So you can see for this chunk right here, it's pushed over here. So we've got this full thing. Remember the pixels that are going to push across here. If I had this chunk, this edge of this new piece needs to be over here because it goes out this side, then it wraps back around. So now that you know the rules of how to make things tile across here, let's take a look at some other cases for how we could set this up to wrap if we wanted to. So I've selected all the different pieces, and you can see I did the same exact workflow for the crown part. We've got for what I consider the wall. Then this is the base right in through here. What I did for the panels is something different, though. You can see that what we talked about before was I want to have one version, this one, and version of this. This one was going to go here, and this one was going to go here for the wrap. You can see I've got this half shape here like this, and we've got these overlapping exactly. Now I don't have these pushed all the way up to the UV border edge. That's completely fine. But I do have these things laid directly on top of each other, so they are sharing UV space and they are perfectly aligned. Same process for this as what I did here. Once I've got two of these set up, um, I can take this and duplicate this one and then push it here, and I can duplicate this one, push it here, and then just delete half of that away. What I did find was actually welding the verts together on these separate parts did help a bit. I did notice whenever I was doing the max frontal distance inside of Substance Painter that those verts being unwelded did cause an issue where I was getting this crossover between this part and this part. The bleed, not the bleed, I'm sorry, the max frontal distance had to be enough to where the pixels were bleed over from each other. The rays were intersecting. I was getting some really bad shading in through. So if you got two parts and pieces that are really close to each other, you're going to need to probably take a look at the geometry and see that base cage inside a Substance Painter, how much of an overlap is there, and is that problematic? Now I did give myself enough bleed here in the UV editor window. And again, I'll just select the other pieces so you can see what's going on with this. I gave some pixel bleed here and I gave some pixel bleed here. I was getting a whole lot of stretching in this area. And if I turn on the design here, what was sculpted, you can see I've got these little, move this out of the way. You can see these nail heads that I've got on here. They were getting warped really bad. So if I take a look at the geometry from this side, maybe you'll encounter something like this. It all depends on what the shape is that you are trying to create. I had a whole lot of surface change from here and then dipping in. And I was getting a whole lot of warping on here. So I try to simplify the geometry as much as I possibly could. This was actually like in a gridded format. And so I even pulled this together to a point. That's why the geometry kind of looks like that. But really, I think the biggest problem that I had was that I wasn't checking when I sculpted how much the surface moved for the sculpt versus my what I consider the game res topology that I'm going to be sending over. So there was a pretty big distance from here to the bait cage. I had to capture a whole lot of this detail in here. This will make a whole lot more sense when we go into Substance Painter. But I had to capture all this detail in here. And in order to do that, I had to grow this mesh out for the frontal distance for the rays to catch. And because of that, it caused this to really be really large and warp out. So you might have some issues like that. Well, so let me close this down here like that. And just tell you, after this is set up, then exported that out as an FBX. Nothing special about that at all. You can see the shape that I've got. You've seen the UVs. And so let's hop on over to Substance Painter and take a look. So this is the final results of everything. If I started a brand new sessions, and if I say new, and I would use this Unreal Engine for starter asset thing, I could take the document resolution, put this to 4096. But just like that tiling video that I showed you for doing tiling textures in ZBrush and then pushing it over here, same workflow exists for that. So I want to use this UV tile workflow and then preserve the tile UV layout. So use this option here. I'm going to go ahead and select the actual piece of geometry that I want for this. And then what I did was I made a folder for my high shapes and my low shapes. And so then this is my low piece of geometry. Again, from Maya, just note that if you want to do matching names, I've got everything in this folder and it's crown low. Everything's got an underscore low. and I've got matching high parts for that. I can select that group, export that thing out. And so here, we'll go ahead and grab that, and it should be good. I'll discard there. Now, I was having a whole lot of problems where the model would not actually load, and it was giving me a bunch of errors. I can't remember the exact terminology for what it said for what those errors were, but what I found out is what I was telling you about earlier, is that the pixels or the UVs were outside of the 0 to 1 range, just ever so slightly, just enough to where it was sticking out, and it would not allow me to import the model at that point. Okay, so taking a look inside of here, if I was going to go do some baking for this, we'll just go to the texture sets and go to bake mesh maps. And you can see they've got a whole lot of really nice options for you to check out, like what's going on with the mesh and everything that's kind of happening with it. I'm going to go ahead and put this document resolution to 4096, and then I'm going to be able to choose my high resolution meshes that I've got. I'll go to my folder that I've made for my high resolution meshes. I can select all of them and then just load them in just like that. Okay. So it's going to load in the high res parts, and then this middle section is definitely the biggest part that is going to have to load in. And like I said, the changes that I made, everything is working a little bit better. These are the defaults for the max frontal distance, which was set to 0.01. I actually ended up having to lower that number a little bit. You can see the matching name thing. If we go to this match by name and common settings, I don't have anything set right now. So watch this. If we go to common settings, we do match and it's set to always. I do think this is a very confusing naming convention for this. This means do not match by mesh name. And then if you do this match by mesh name that you see right here, like that, now I'm going to get an error, and you can see it's going to throw this error at me. And that's because I took my parts and my pieces. This is completely up to you. You can use whatever naming convention that you want for this, but this is what I did. I called mine capital L, capital H, like this, right here. And that should fix it. So they do have some tools in here to help you to understand if you're trying to do the match by mesh name. Are you going to run into some issues with that? Something else to note about this baking process is that you have to set this in the common settings, and they've got some other places where you will have to set this up. Okay. So if you want ambient occlusion, if you want it to feel like all these parts and pieces are actually casting ambient occlusion next to each other, then go ahead and leave the default settings the way that they are. But if you want to do this matching by mesh name, you got to do the self occlusion and do only same name mesh. I'm going to leave it alone. I'd actually want it to feel like it's all put together as one piece, and we're going to get ambient occlusion across all the different parts and pieces that we have in here. Curvature, they've got the same thing, and if we can do this for only same mesh name. Position does not have it. Thickness, they have it for thickness as well. I do want it to generate a height map. We did look at the other video that I produced about the tiling textures. If you wanted the option to be able to do parallax occlusion inside of here, or if you wanted to do it inside of Unreal, you would need to bake a height map. The other thing that I just recently learned about is using bent normals, and that is actually pretty darn cool because it's a combination of ambient occlusion and normal information. It takes the ambient occlusion and kind of bakes it directly into the bent normals area. You would have to have a special setup. I think there's a very simple node inside of Unreal where you'd have to take your normal map and then you'd have to plug it into a bent normal node. But that's something that I think I might explore in the future. But why not? If we want to just go ahead and create it, why not do that, right? So we've got the self occlusion, and you might have to say only same mesh name for that as well. Again, I was having some issues with the frontal distance on this, and you can see these parts and pieces do get really close together as you start to bake this thing. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Bake Selected Texture and see what it. Okay, so it usually goes by pretty quick, even with having the 2096 by 4096. Really good options for you at that. point. When it gets done, I'm going to show you a little bit of these options that they have in here for the baking visualization that they've got, and what that all kind of means, and it can help you maybe identify some issues and some problems. The biggest thing to note is probably this matching error that they've got, and if anything's red on your model, that's definitely going to be problematic, and you're not actually baking in that particular section. So that's something that you'll definitely want to watch out for. So I think it's getting really close. I guess it's doing the bent normal right now. So you can see it actually goes through each one of these different things that they've got. So this red, I do have this sitting outside of here, and so it's going to show red, no big deal, but this is where our mesh ends. But if we had our frontal distance down a little bit too low, let's say we put this down to 0.01, something like that, you can see that this red is going to show through, and it's going to basically show us that you're going to have some problems with your bake. And so that's where you can kind of dial this thing in. I would suggest just encapsulating everything to the point where it's not red, and then don't use massive numbers for things, because like I said, I was getting some issues where I was getting warping on my textures and everything else like that because that number was so high. So that red will allow you to see that. You can turn off the actual mesh that, I guess that's the mesh that it's pushed out on there. So you could have that on. This cage surface, you can control that. You can actually control the opacity of it as well. So they got some options for that. You can change the wireframe color of the bake cage and what's going on with that. And you can see how far it actually is pushing that out. So you're able to visualize what this max frontal distance is and what it means, right? So after that, we turn these two different things off, these UV seams. If you have any missing seams on hard edges, it's going to alert you and warn you about that. And what I understand about that is if you do have any open seams on things, that you should have hard edges along those open seams as well. So those will draw purple for you, and it'll show you that that's missing. If you want, at the end, if we turn off this wireframe, this is the final baked version that we have within through here. And if we open this up, you can see the quality, and we can put this on very high to see the specular response. You can hold shift, rotate this around so you can see how the specular response is going to work for you and everything else like that. So you don't even need to go to return to painting mode. It's going to let you take a look and see everything that you need for this. You can actually change the specular response on this, so you can make it a little bit more specular if you want, or you can knock that back. I think for just checking modeling quality, you'll probably want to keep that about where it was at 0.3. Just something to note too, the quality being set to very high. This is something that you would need in Unreal. If you want the same specular response to be like what you see in Substance Painter as what you see on the Unreal Engine, you want that to be set to be very high. And I should probably even just check this in the here. If I think I might have to go out it because I need to see the shader for it, but I should set that in the settings over there as well. You can check out the AO intensity, and so you could drive that over more if you wanted. And like I was saying, if we do this 0.75, if you want to check out the bent normals, if you've got one made, and I made one, we can take a look at the difference between the bent normal and then the regular one. And like I was saying, it's a subtle change, but it's almost like you're basically taking ambient occlusion and you're baking it, and it's being stored within the normal information on there. So you can check that out. So everything looks pretty good. And everything looks pretty good because I spent quite some time trying to figure out what's the best response for a lot of this stuff. Now, not everything is perfect, and you can see with that frontal distance, I've got some things like this where this is baking into this part. Now, this is all one section right here, so that's why this is baking into here like that. Now, the other alternative that I have for things, and I could just turn everything back on this normals. Yeah, and I can close those back up. it's possible that we can use our own cage to bake with, right? And so I was exploring some of that too, and I was taking a look at that. What I really wish would be this would be so awesome is if you could actually take um, the cage that it's spitting out for you, and you could actually do some modeling changes directly in here because usually it feels like there's just some spot fixes that you need to do. But if you want to make your own mesh, let's take a look at that. Okay. We need to hop back over to Maya and then take a look. I'm going to hold this folder and I'm going to hide it. And then I've got this folder here and I'll do Shift H to bring this back. If I actually, I'm going to show this one. So this is the mesh that we just sent over to Substance Painter. And then this baking cage is derived from that mesh that you see. So I just duplicated this whole folder structure, and you can see that the mesh has been pushed out on here. So really what's happening in this mode is, let me select some of these faces and hit F11 for that. I want to convert these faces to verts. I can hit Control and then do F9 because vertices. And that's how you can change from one selection type to another. Hold on Control and then hit that. Right. Movement, the normal movement, and we can do everything like this. And I think this would make sense to most people is that we can push this thing out. But what probably won't make sense is, if you've never seen this, is double clicking on the tool settings. And instead of moving in the world or object, you can actually put this on normal. You're going to get these three different axes that you see here. And then if I actually take the N and I click and I drag that, I'm going to be pushing and pulling along the normal. And the normal is, you think about this like little hair that's sticking out in the middle of this vertice, or this face. Then we would have a direction like this, and then we would have one right in through here. So think about these angles that we've got, and it's moving along these angles. Now vertices, they have their own normal information too. So that's what I did to push this out. So I tried to get a distance that was very similar to what I was seeing inside of Substance Painter. If you do want to make your own base cage to bake with, I just want to show you this one thing. We've already looked at this model that I kicked out from ZBrush, and I brought it in here. We've already seen that I added a red shader to it, but this thing could really, really help you out, to help you to understand. It's basically the same kind of setup that we saw inside of Substance Painter, where they had this red matching error mesh. So it's a very similar setup to what we've got inside of Maya. So we've got this red mesh back and through here, and then there are certain areas on this mesh that I pulled some of these faces forward just because I think there are and stuff like that that were sticking out. So everything else was like good to go for some of these pieces that I saw here. What I tried to do was take a look at is this going to be tiling across this other area and symmetry on that. So if this thing actually sat here, then I needed to make sure that I selected this one over here, and I moved those both for the same time for both of those shapes and those pieces. And so then that gave me something inside of Maya that was a very similar setup for things. The other thing is just if you've got this open, everything over here is a live update to these files. So anytime I do any kind of change inside of Maya, as soon as I save that, it's actually going to update over here. So I wish there was a live link between this stuff. And the other thing I really wish is that we could take whatever Substance kicks out as their cage file, that you could actually export that out and then do some tweaking in some other program. Ultimate goal would be to get some ability to just tweak that mesh directly inside of here. So with that on here, I'm just going to go ahead and say bake selected texture. If I've done everything correct with the bake cage, then I should be getting very similar results to what I had this thing, but then I've got some additional control, and I can really get in there in a granular level and really work on some of the fine tuning on things. As I'm watching this now, I'm going to be mindful of this area right here. And I do know I was getting a whole lot of stretching, like I said, on some of these things like that in this area. But then all along this edge here was some other areas that were problematic to me. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get a really good handle on exactly what needs to happen with the base bake cage. And this is what I was talking about. It is stretching this just a little bit in this area, and it's still it still is baking onto that. So I was going to be like super nitpicky about this stuff, then I would have to either bake things out of the maps that were generated, which is a pain, or I could sit there and try to keep filling with this until I get to the point where I'm getting ultra clean bakes. And that's not an easy thing to do. Okay, so that's a lot for everything that I took a look at to learn to get my bakes to work correctly and some of the pitfalls that I ran into. So hopefully that's some good information for you and it's going to help you in your endeavor to get your good tiling bakes going across in Substance Painter for you as well. Okay, before we move on to the next section, I just wanted to show you that it is possible to get rid of some of these errors, and I did work with this a little bit more. See that I was finally able to resolve this baking here. I didn't have to play with it too much, but I did have to work at it just a little bit, and you can see what I ended up doing with some of these edges that you see here, like this. And this is the original mesh before it was expanded out, and everything was getting a little bit tight in here. So going on there, and just took some of the geo, took this edge and moved it up, gave some nice curvature and spacing on that. Seemed to do the trick. I'll hop back over to Painter just again and show you that was the problematic area. And so if you have some issues like that as well, don't give up and then keep trying on the mesh and try to see if you can understand what is causing some of the warping issues that you might be. Okay, now that the technical parts are out of the way, now we can finally start looking at the fun part, which is actually painting, adding some life to this thing. So I know it was a lot to get to this point, but it does feel like with this workflow, there's a lot of rules to pay attention to and a lot of things to take into consideration, um, mainly just to get rid of these seams issues. So I do recognize that it's a whole lot of work to get there, but I do think it's worth it once it's done. Before I head over to Unreal and export these things, I did want to talk to you about a little bit about like what I actually created for this. So I'm just gonna turn everything off and go through step by step and then show you some of the different parts and pieces that I made for this on my thought process on some of this work here. So this is where we left off from the last part before I stopped the video, and we were taking a look at the baking, and you're going to get something very similar to this at this point. I did mention to you that we want the same exact specular response inside of Substance Painter as what we do have inside of Unreal. In order to do that, we need to go to the shader setting that's right here, and you can see that there's this base surface specular quality, and it is by default usually set to low. I don't know if you can tell much of a difference between the way that the specular changes on there. It doesn't seem like much at this point, but when you get into very highly reflective metals and things like that, the values do tend to change quite a bit. So put this on very high for that, and then you'll be set to go for that. The other thing I like to do is if I go to this part here, if I scroll up, is I like to turn shadows on and then make the computation mode, set that to intensive, and then maybe drop back the intensity of the shadow opacity. So if you shift right click, you're going to be able to move your light around on there, and you're going to be able to see the shadows and then just kind of let it sit. But that should give you pretty good options at that point. Activate post effects. Sometimes I like to use this vignette on there and maybe crank that up a little bit, but that's up to you. That's just kind of a visual thing. I definitely like to have anti-aliasing turned on, so just at least activate that. If you're going to do anything with subsurface scattering, you'd have to, well, I think that should be pretty good to get us a pretty good visual quality to kind of work with. So the next thing I did is just, I like to use fill layers a whole lot, and let me go ahead and this vignette, it's not a lot of texture there. Okay. So click out of there and then go back to this. If I roll my specular around this, you can see that there's not this perfect specular across the entire surface, especially when I take the light and move it this far here. So you can see this kind of grunge or things like that. I do think that it's pretty good to break up any of this perfect specular that rolls across your surface. So what I found is a nice way to do that is this filter. So if you just go to your fill layer, and on this one I just have color and then roughness on there, and you can see I've got this base brown, and then my roughness is something pretty high, so it's like 0.65 almost or something like that, right? And then to get this to where it shows up and this doesn't have this perfect specular, if you go up to this area and you add a new filter to it, and you can choose one of the filters, you can see that the filter that I chose is this one here. There is this metal finish rough. And again, I think it's pretty nice for disrupting any surface. What I thought was interesting about this is that it's actually changing the normal map information. So if you tap C, you go to the normal here, I think it's potentially this one, normal plus height. If we roll the light around and if we shift right click, let me just tab see about that. There are other ways to get to this and through here. So if I take a look at the normal map right there on there like that, not going to let me roll the light around, but you can see what's happening with this. It's not a perfect blue, right? So I did think that that was odd that it does that, but it's doing the trick, right? I put that on there, and then the next part I put on here is just darkening some of these shapes. What I used on this, if I took this, just did a duplicate of it, and you can see I made it a little bit darker. And then I like to add masks to things. So if I added a black mask or a white mask, you can do either one right here. That's one way of adding a mask, but then I could actually use this add mask color select. If I select the mask, you can see here's the color selection that was added. And we've got two different colors. So if I do the pick color, remember we filled with those very bright colors for that clown pass. Here they are showing up for it, right? Something to note about that, just to make sure. I can't remember if I talked about that or not, but if you go to the Bake Mesh Maps and you got it on ID, change that color source to vertex color, and then that will bake the vertex color that was pushed out from ZBrush. Okay, so return to painting that, and yeah, so you get this color picker, and it's going to make it real easy to add things to this. If I do another one, then maybe do this one here, and then you can actually just delete these things out too if you don't want them. So super convenient for you to be able to use these. Let's go back to the layers. So I did one there. And on this one, I did a lighten. So I wanted this area to stand out a little bit more from everything else. And I did that metal rough on there too, just to disturb the surface just a little bit on there. And with this mask, I did the color selection. So you'll see that this setup that I've got, I'm starting to use a very similar setup for things. This one, I called it a burst, but it was basically, you can see the blending mode is set to a screen. So it's actually a lightning effect. So it lightens what we've got. And then again, I just have some roughness value on there. That's different than everything else. So then my late edges maybe have a little bit more specularity to them than everything else. So you see how I added that roughness and then pumped it up just a little tiny bit. So we're just getting a little bit more of a specular response in some of the light areas versus the dark area. If I go within through here, what I did is, let me turn these off one at a time. You can also hold down Alt, click on the mask, and you can actually see what's going on. Okay. So on this burst, you can actually make a mask, and then you could tell it to use fill layer, or you can use paint, or you can use generators, or the filter like that we just looked at. So I started with a fill, and then what I went into this area for this grayscale was actually using the curvature. So if you get used to your baking operations, you know that you've got access to any of those maps that you've baked out. And then in this case, then I actually used the curvature. So you can start typing curve, and then you can find your curvature map and then just plug it into that, right? So this is what the curvature map looks like as it's been baked out from Substance Painter. And then after that, then I added levels to it. Just like Photoshop, if we turn this thing on, we can change the levels of this. And so you can see you've got dark ends, you've got mid tones, you've got lights. So let me get back to this. And so what I like to do is try to crunch the values on there. So I'm trying to find the edges along through there using the curvature. So I did that for that. And then the next thing that I did was added another fill layer. And this time I used a generator. And then the generator that I used was an occlusion. So I'm finding the ambient occlusion, then I'm setting that to multiply. So it takes everything down below it, and then it's multiplying ambient occlusion over the top of it. So here you can see the final results of that. So all that was done to put everything together basically like what you see like there. And again, on what I would suggest for you, just like in 3D modeling, you're always spinning around the model. When you're starting to work with materials and textures, hold down shift right click and move the light around. See how the light responds to the surfaces and see if it gives you the correct response, what you're looking for, if it's plastic or if it's metal, it's wood or something like that, right? So that's how you can kind of test that there. So then I did another one and I called it darken, and I set the blending mode on that to be multiply. So it's going to take any color that we have and it's going to add darkening effect. Instead of using just pure black, what I chose was just a very slight tint towards blue, kind of almost purplish hue in through there. So that's giving me that. If we hold down Alt and click and take a look at the mask of what we've got on there, I just used the ambient occlusion generator and yeah, so then you might have to select on that generator, and I can't remember if I did actually invert that, but you have the ability to invert ambient occlusion. So whatever your needs are, you're going to be able to figure that out. So that added that darkening effect to everything. Then I did another lighten effect on top of things. Let's see what I did for this one. If I go to the map, let's turn everything off and then start with the fill layer. Again, just did what I did before. I told you did the curvature with the levels and crunch the values. On this one, I did it really, really harsh and then just really tried to pick up these edges on there at that point. And then I took a blur node, which is there's a filter through here. So the blur node's another one of these, because it's outdated. Let me just select that. So I got blur. And then the next one after that is called blur slope, which adds almost like a painterly effect to things. So with this filter type, again, you add a filter here. And then you get to choose which type of filter type that you want. And we could do blur slope like this. Let me hit undo. Yeah, so is blur slope outdated? Let's see what's going in the intensity. So I think maybe this was changed to intensity divider. So I think this is like the scale of things and how granular it gets, and then you've got an intensity slider that you put so we could really crank that up or push it back. So that's up to you how you want to do that. I think there's also some blending modes, max, blur, be within there. There are some other things that you could play around with in here. Well, haven't really played with this too much, but I know for the stylized texturing workflow, a lot of people use this as a node. Okay, so I'll just close that back up. And again, it's just adding a lightning effect over everything else. And then I did this thing where I called it variation. Another thing that I like to do is put folder groups. So you make a folder and you put the effect inside of it. You might at times need to take the folder, and I've got this thing that sits inside of it here, this fill layer set to multiply. Now, if I had this just on normal, it's not going to give me the results that I'm looking for. Because I want this thing to be a multiply on there, I need to set this folder group that I made and set it to pass through. That lets everything pass through down to here, and it gets the response from here. So that's a little bit important to do on this. What I did was a fill layer on this one. If I hold down Alt and then click on it, and if I turn the levels off, you can see that I filled it, but I filled it with the height map that they have. And the height map is going to give you a black and white map. Whatever's closest to the camera is going to be white. Whatever's dark is going to be pushed away from the camera. So I just filled that within there and then took a levels adjustment and punched the values a little bit more in. So that's what I put on there. Then because that's in a folder, then I can add another mask to this thing. So I did a color selection. Let's go hold on Alt and you can see exactly what was done on this. So let's go to the color selection, which was set to red. So it's just going to pick up just this area. See here. And then I put a paint layer on here. Okay, we're good. And then on the paint layer, I was actually painting the result out of this because it's darkening. And this, wherever I'm painting, it's actually going to make it a little bit lighter because remember, this is a multiply. So a multiply actually darkens things. And so this is me painting, hand painting, and kind of getting a little bit of variation on it. Then I put another one of those slope blurs on here. We take a look at that and look at beautiful parameters. Uh, yeah, you can see the intensity and the divider, what I set for that. And then the final for that is something like this and through here. So it just makes it a little bit lighter. And what I just changed does look quite a bit more intense or different than what before. I think it might be something to do. Okay. And again, if I have this on blur slope, I'm going to change that just a little bit. The other thing that I did was put a little bit of height information on here, so I should be able to go through this. I'm sorry, I did some kind of, I'm looking. I tap M, now I can see the material. Okay, that was freaking me out a little. I thought I ruined this and I had to restart and just reload that. Okay, so if you tap C, you're looking at these different channels there. I must have accidentally hit C. If you tap M, you get to see the full material. Okay, so there's the variation on there. And then I have another thing at the very top, and I called it kill roughness. And the only thing that I have selected in this fill layer is roughness. And so I made it 100% rough. So that does kill all the roughness on here. It is possible you can kill a mask or disable it. So you can say toggle mask, and that'll toggle it off. So now you can see how much of a difference that played. This is kind of where everything was sitting before. And then if I bring this back, you can see what I've got going on here. And then I added a mask to that. And then after I added the mask, added a generator, I believe, right? Or no, this is the ambient occlusion. And if I hold on Alt and click on this, you can see kind of what we did. So I was just making it not so rough in the ambient occlusion area. I wanted to kill all the roughness in that area, make sure no specular or shiny getting in that area. So it makes it nice and dark, but then also reflects a little bit what goes on normally in reality, corners and things like that, cracks that get a bit darker than everything else. Okay, so everything was put in this one folder for that, so I can collapse that whole thing up. The other cool thing is after you make a folder like this, like I've done quite a bit of work to make this material. If I want to reuse it again on another project after I've got the folder on here, I can right click on here just like this, and then I can say create smart material. You do that, you give it a name, and it's actually going to show up over here in the list. Okay, so let's say this was the stylized wood that I had. You can right click on it. You can actually show in Explorer, and it will show you the location of where that thing sits. So if you're in a team structure or a team dynamic, you can actually take that and you can give it to your team, and they can load it up, and then everybody's using that same smart material. So you've all got the same type of wood, metal, plastic, all that, right? So pretty cool workflow. So here's the nails that I was talking to you about, and then that was a real easy one. I just made a metal shader for this, and then on that one, just use the color selector. And then just able to select bolts on that. If we go to this shader, nothing spectacular at all. Just got color, roughness, and metal. The roughness is up to about 0.6, all the way up on the metallic. You can see it gets a pretty nice regular. We rotate the light around. And then after that, then I did this thing that I called steel on here. And then that's just kind of the base for it. And then I got another one over the top of it and called it steel brush. So on this one is a little bit more complex. I just got this thing to be a little bit more reflective than the one that was down below it. So you can see this was like a little bit of a brown tan kind of thing, and the roughness is pretty high on it. And this one, the roughness is a whole lot lower. and so it's a bit more reflective, right? If you take a look at the folder for this one, or mask for this one's a bit more complex. I'll hold on Alt and click on it, and we can go through this and take. So on the mask that was done on here, got curvature. This is probably not the best order for this, and so it really should probably be curvature and then levels. Doesn't actually look like you did anything with the levels, so I guess that's why I wasn't really doing anything. So don't really need it. Might have accidentally clicked that or something like that, or thought I needed it. We've got the curvature map here that you can see. And then the next thing I've got is a color selection to make sure that it only, mask out this particular area. And that's done with blue. And if I do the color picker, you can see I've already got that. So all I had to do is click on that. And then on this one, after that, then this is set to contrast. So let's see. This is just a filter type. And the filter type will allow you to have a little bit more contrast on it. So pretty easy. And then when that's done, see if I did look like maybe that levels mattered. So let me see if I can get that back to the point here. This and did it again to myself. Tab M. I was looking at the color map. Okay, need to be aware of that. I'm paying attention to that. Okay. So here we go again, and the very top part is just adding this gold to things. And we take a look at here, something kind of similar. This one I just did the color selection, did blur it just a little bit to give just a little bit of slight haziness to the edge. I took the levels, and actually on this, you can actually take the levels and you can tie in and you can lessen it, so it's almost like an opacity thing, or this direction and everything brighter. So it's possible to do that with levels too on the bottom controls that you've got. And then I actually did some hand painting on some of this to get this final effect here. So this was everything that I put together from a textural standpoint to get everything up and running for the textures. And then the next step would be actually taking the results of this and then pushing them to Unreal. All right, we're back inside of Maya, and the thing that I want to try to explain to you and show to you is this geometry setup that we have. And the goal of mine is to get this repeatable chunk that we've got. If I duplicate it, if I hold X and just push this up here, if I duplicate this and run X like that, hit Shift D, hold down X like that, you can see if I turn off the wireframe unshaded, we now have our tiling piece of geometry that goes in a straight line. But if I want to build unlimited corridors and interior spaces and things like that, I need to get this working in a way where I can take all the parts and pieces and I can snap them up. So what I basically need is this part here to tile and start here. And I need to finish the tile on the outer side, but we need a corner piece that bends 90 degrees in. And then we have this one that bends 90 degrees out this direction like that. And then that allows us to take straights, and then we can go this direction with it, and we can go this direction with it and go out. Or I could hide this, take this one piece, and if I hold down J on rotate that 90 degrees, and then hold down X, and I should be able to get all these parts and pieces to snap up. So we're just building a modular set for things that works for us, so we can actually get everything to kind of snap up. Okay, so that's the goal of everything. And let's take a look at the parts and pieces that I made for that. Let me show you this piece that I've got right here, and I called this Unreal Flat. And the reason I called it flat was because I took all the pieces and I merged them together. And I actually, to show you this next part for slicing through the mesh, I took geometry and made sure that everything was watertight as far as verts lining up with verts on certain areas, and so there is no holes in this mesh, I guess you could say, because we had this piece here. You know, we had all of our parts and pieces that were separate. So I just merged everything together that way and made sure I've got a one-piece model. So I should be able to hit F10, go to my edges, and I can double click this, and you should see that it's going to give me the entire surrounding area for the boundary for this at that point. Okay. It's not crucial that you do this, but then some of the techniques I'm going to show you to slice through this, it would be beneficial for you to have this all joined together and merged together like that. Okay, so that's the first part, and getting everything together. And then what I was doing at that point was, let me just get rid of these two things here. So I was just taking this, I've got it in a group. It's possible that I could have my pivot point of the group separate than what the object is. That's completely up to you. But if I did this, if I went to modify and then reset transformations, it should throw the pivot point back into the world origin. Okay, so for me, I kept that in a group. Again, I can have a different pivot point for the actual object like this. And if I had hold down B, I could snap that after I tap D to move the pivot point. So now I've got two pivot points, one at the center there and the back of the wall, and then I've got this one in the corner. So I've got two different ways of being able to kind of move this thing around. I'm going to now take this and duplicate it, Control D, and then I'll duplicate it again, Control D. I'm just going to take this and hide it because I'm going to be reusing this over and over again. So I'll select it, hit Control H to hide it. And so now I got two pieces. And what I'm going to do now with this is I'm going to put on the rotate tool, tap E. I'm going to hold down J, and then I can rotate and I can snap with increments. So now I'm set to 90-degree rotation on there like that. Okay. So this first piece that I'm going to make is this. I want this part of the tile here, and then this is the back side of it, and I want this side. And I basically need to slice through this thing to get this part here. Let me go ahead and just I'll go ahead and hide that for just a second. I'll select that. So there's three different ways that I found that you could do this. One is using the mirror tool and using the cut function within that. The other is the multi-cut tool, and you can just click and drag across the model, and you should be able to slice right through it. And what I was doing is going to the top and then doing a very specific angle to slice through it. We can look at that. The other thing is actually generating a NURBS curve, and then using that, we'll project that curve onto the mesh, and then we can actually slice or cut the mesh with that curve. That was actually the most, probably the easiest way that I found to be accurate, at least. If I wanted to go and say, what was the easiest way to do this that maybe wasn't so clean, as if I put these two parts and pieces on, tap the space bar, go to the top, it would be this, using the multi-cut tool. So if I select this part here, and we hold down Control-Shift-X for the multi-cut tool, the option for that, or you can go here and you can grab it there. We should be able to take this tool and just go zoom in. And I'm going to just drag right from this area and drag straight across. If I hold down Shift, it will snap to these increments. And you can see I put this snap step down to 5%. That way it will give me a 45-degree angle. And then the next thing that I've got to do is take this piece here. Let me tap Q, select this, and then now I'll use the multi-cut tool on this piece. And I'll do the same exact thing. I'll just drag straight through from here and cut across. And you can see that that's not super accurate. I do want to try to get as close as I possibly can to each other on this. And this is why I wasn't a big fan of this method, just because it's not super accurate. Okay. So you can see I just sliced through this. Now I don't need the back side of this, and I don't need this side of this one either. So I would have to do something like this. I can't just select this part and then grow the selection out and then delete it away. they are still connected in some kind of way. So if I hide this, maybe this makes it a little bit easier to see for what I want. So now I have F11, and I'll just drag through this, select these, get rid of it like that. Okay. So I'm going to show you these different methods because who knows, you might have some problem geometry that just doesn't want to play nice with you, and you might find you're running out of some options. So I'm going to give you 3 different things to take a look at. I did feel like maybe this one was the more complicated one that was a little bit more messy to do. But like I was saying, maybe you are running out of options and you are not figuring out exactly what you need, and this might be a solution for you. I'm just going to get rid of some of these pieces in here, and I'm just going to leave that little tiny sliver there like that. So there's one part there, and then we bring this back. I can go ahead and actually let's see if I can leave that there and work with it. I'm going to start deleting this stuff out. Obviously don't need any of that. So I can start getting a little bit closer to what I need. Like that. I just want to make sure I'm not deleting away anything that's actually important. And let's see if I select this face. It's been cut too. Okay, good. Then I should be able to get rid of these through here. I'm basically just getting rid of this backside. Okay. That seems to work. And then I might have one little tiny polygon here, and then it looks like a face there. Okay. And what's helpful for me is I've got this really thick border along here to let me know what's the boundary edge. You can go to display, polygons, custom polygon display, option box. You can do that, and you can turn on, I've got it on all highlight border edges, and I've got a pretty good thickness on there. So that can help in these situations. So now I would need to take this piece, and I need to combine it together. So I'll go to mesh, combine, like that. I'll just delete the history. And then I need to weld up all these vertices. And you can see because of the inaccuracy of that, it's going to be a pretty good little distance on there. I can use a tool inside of Maya, so I can select in object mode. I'm going to right click, go to object mode, and I can convert that to vertices. So I can hit Control F9, and that'll convert object mode into vertices. So it's selecting all the verts in the model. And now at that point, I can do Shift right click, and I can go merge vertices and do merge vertices with the option box at that point. And it's only going to merge vertices if I do a really low value, like 0.001. Verts basically have to be sitting right directly on top of each other to merge them together. Now that's not going to work for me. If I up this number and get this to be higher, I got to be a little bit careful about this, but I need to find the sweet spot where it starts to get these things merged up. So I'll do 0.5 and go even higher. And you can see it merged everything together. If that value is just too high, you can see it's going to start, let me hit undo real quick. I'm just going to go like really high, and you can see it's going to start grabbing stuff and then just merging it all together like that. Definitely not what we want. So again, I'll just do, let's do 1 and see if that works. That's grabbing too much. See how it's grabbing too much in here. So 0.5, something like that. Now that is changing the shading on here, and I think that's why that shift happened there. So maybe after that, I hit F10, select all my edges going along through there, and I'll hold down Shift and then select that. And then maybe I'll just Shift right click and say harden edge, like that. Okay, so there's that piece. There's some stuff that we can do about these corners. Corners are going to be problematic. That's not really for this part right here. We could take the UVs and you can warp the UVs. There's some other stuff that we can do where we could chop off some part of this and build some maybe specific geometry off of our trim sheet to kind of hide the fact that that's going on in there. But that's going to be normal. So let's just call this example 1, and I'll hide it. Okay, so there's the first example of how to do that, and that's using the multi-cut tool. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this twice again, show this. This time, instead of going out, I'll go in like this, and I'll hold down J, and I'll do this right here. So I should have, instead of coming in like we did, now we are going to build a part that's going to go out. And in this time, I want to use a different technique. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm actually going to take the model and I'm going to use the mirror tool. So if you shift right click on object mode, you can get mirror and do the option box for that. All right. And so here are the options for this. I'm going to do mirror axis position instead of world, which would work just fine. I can even put it on here like that. And you can see it's going to mirror across the negative direction. So it's pushing this way over here like that. After we run it, it's going to give you this thing here, and you can actually change the options on this. So I want to make sure this tile off to the side is here. So I needed to change that mirror direction to be positive like this. And instead of doing axis position world, I'm going to put it on object. Okay. The reason that happened, let's hit undo. Undo again. I need to do a better job of actually controlling this, and let me hit undo until I get to the point where before we did any of the mirroring stuff. Okay. So in order for this to work, I forgot I moved that pivot point on there. The pivot point, I'm going to use it right here on the world origin, right here like that. So I'm just going to go modify, reset transformations. Okay, let's do this again. And we already looked at the world position one. Let's do object this time. I'll hit apply. And I want to make sure that that direction is got the bolts and everything on this side, like this pattern. So that needs to be flipped. So I'm going to do this direction, do it positive like that. So you can see it flipped it there. Okay. The axis position is again set to object. And then now I can actually rotate this, and you can see what's going to happen. We could rotate it in, and we could go out as well. Let me hit undo. So if you hold down J, you can snap to increments like this. Okay. So the option that I have on here is telling it to just cut geometry. So what's happening is it's going to give me this part, and then it makes this new part that is actually not valid for me because it flipped this. What I want on this side is this repeat that we have over here. So actually I can get rid of this. So I just use that just to do the cut operation on it. And then I don't need this piece because it's not going to give me what I'm looking for. I need this to be on this side, and on this side, I need basically what we see here, just like this. But I don't want that, right? So I need a combination of this and this. So we're going to do the same thing again, and this time we're going to do object again, just like we just did. Let's just try changing that to positive and see what happens. Watch this area right here and make sure that this sticks and holds. So hit apply, and I did it to myself again. Let's take the pivot point. Let's do this. Go modify, reset transformations. Okay, hit apply, and let's pay attention to this area. And if I move this out of the way, looks like we need to flip that like that. So I need this on this side, right? Just like we talked about. So again, now I'm going to take this rotation, and if I hold down J while I do that, it'll give me that. And I don't need that part. I can get rid of it. And then so that just gave me this corner and then this corner. Okay. And if you take a look at it, it's super accurate, right? So everything should line up vert for vert for us. And now we can just combine these two parts and pieces together. So I can go to mesh and I'll do combine. And then I'll select my object, hit Control F9. That will convert that to vertices. Shift right click to go to merge vertices. Do that option that we just talked about, like that, and you should see everything well together. Now, to test things, to make sure everything's welded, you can visually see it, but then also I can tap 3 to do smooth mesh preview, and I can kind of see if that's working. I do use that as a modeling trick just to see if there's any holes on my model and everything. Okay, so there's that. I'll hit delete for that and call this example 2, like that. If I can spell, there we go. I'll go ahead and hide that, and let's do one more. So take a look at this. I don't need that one anymore, so I'll duplicate this, show these two for you, and then rotate this, and we'll do the first one again just to show you this as an option. Okay, I think the reason I want to show you this, it's clean for one thing, and then the other thing is that you might actually use this for multiple options. So I think it's kind of cool. We're going to use a NURBS curve to actually cut through this object. Okay, so in order to make a NURBS curve, we're going to go to create, and we're going to go to curves, curve tool, and then we're going to use, I'm just going to use this EP curve tool because it just makes it real easy to add a couple points. So here we are in that mode. I've got my grid up, and I'm going to hold down X, and I'm going to click once here. I'm going to click once here in the middle of the grid, and then hold down X, and then click here. Again, I'm just going to give myself a straight line that I can work with. Okay. So now we know that we need a 45-degree angle. Hold down J, and I'll just snap this until it's a 45-degree angle. And if we want to take a look in the channel box, we can see that that's the case. If I move this up, I can actually even turn a wireframe on shaded, and I can see, hey, do you want to snap in some particular area on this model? So it looks like the intersection point on this is going to be, if I hold down V and then move in this direction like this, I should be able to snap right there. And if I hold down V, I can move in this direction and then snap right here. And we should be able to see the line kind of go like this, right? So if you take a look at it, you see how it's going to basically slice right through this. So that's one thing that we could do, or we could, if you want to put it at the top, it's up to you. You could hold down V. I'm going to just snap to this and then hold down V and then go right here and snap to this point. So there's a bunch of different ways how you can get to the exact point that you're looking for this, okay? All right, so we need to project this curve onto this mesh. So I'm just going to select the curve and then hold down Shift, add the mesh to that, and then under edit mesh, we can do project curve on mesh. If you want to take a look at the options for this, you should look at the options for this. I want this to project down onto like this grid, and so that's the x-axis and then the z-axis. So that's why I chose this plane right here. That chooses this this plane in that direction going down, right? Let's see. I think I put on this project to edges only. I don't know. I don't really know the options of this that well, so I did have that on, but let's try this anyway. So let's just say project curve. And so it projects all the way through, and you can see that. That's pretty cool, right? And then now the next thing that you want to do, if you want this to actually cut the geometry, you see this projected curve that it made? And then if we hold down Shift and we add the piece of geometry to it, then we can go to Edit Mesh and then Split Mesh with Projected Curve. Okay. Now at that point, it's going to split it. If I double click this, it should select all this geo over here, and I can just blow it away. Pretty simple to do that, right? And then I could do the same operation on this side over here. So I can select my curve, select my object. We can go to Edit Mesh, Project on Curve, and then we select the curve, add the mesh to it, and then go to Mesh, Edit Mesh, sorry, Split Mesh with Curve. Then I don't need this part here. Hit F11, double click it, and then just get rid of it. And then that is, I don't know. I just think that's super easy. It's a little bit easier to understand maybe what's going on with the geometry and everything else like that. And then just like what we did before, we just need to combine these objects, mesh combine, control F9, shift right click, merge vertices with the threshold. It's high enough. And looks like with that one, that is why I did use that option. I forgot about this. So this project to edges only, you can see it did make some verts that we just don't need. So I'd have to go through and just select them and then delete them to get that kind of cleaned up. So I noticed I didn't have any of those issues before whenever I used that option. So that's, I guess, what's going on with that option. Yeah, so this works pretty good. Let's get rid of that, like that. I'll just run through this. Yeah, so that made a bunch of extra points for me. Don't need that one in through there. Okay, good to go. And let's try this one more time. And I still have one more there. Darn it. Okay, try one more time. Object mode, control F9, and then shift right click, merge vertices to center. And maybe I need to make that distance a little bit bigger, like that. And yeah, so I would have to do some work to get this thing cleaned up a little bit more. So I do know this. If I had to manually clean things up, which is never fun, I can drag a marquee around these two birds here, shift right click, and then this time go to merge vertices to center. Keep going up the model like this. And at that point, I need to find out if there's some additional issues going on. So I'm not going to troubleshoot this right here on camera. I think that's going to take too much time. The other thing is, take a look at this. Do you see how that merged all these pieces together because that threshold was just too high for that? So that is one of the dangers of using this tool. You got to be careful with if your numbers are just too high. That it can merge that stuff together like that. So I think the biggest thing is me needing to now get rid of all these extra vertices that just are not needed on both sides. Now, on that point, I can just shift right click, merge vertices to center. And if my geometry is sound, you can see it's going to start pulling that stuff together like that. Yeah, and I'd have to do quite a bit more work on this to get everything cleaned up. So again, depending on what you're seeing, and if I would have used this option, I think this option would have been a whole lot more clean and easy to use. No matter what, you might at times have to check the geo that is being generated for you. Actually, maybe I understand why they weren't joining together. I forgot to merge them. Okay, I was going to get rid of some of this stuff. And at the end, what I ended up having was these two different pieces. It really doesn't matter what method you use, but you can always check your work by saying like, hey, can I take this in corner and then out, and can I join them together? Do they actually snap up? Is everything working as expected? And then I can just group those, and I can duplicate that group, hold down X, and if I'm snapping to the grid correctly, I should be able to keep doing some stuff like that. Okay. So that will give you all the parts and pieces that you need to basically make unlimited corridors and things like that, right? So I know I'm only proving out that I took my my flats together with my curved parts, and it looks like I'm off on that one just a little bit, but I just need to snap that up. If you ever need to do that, tap D and you can hold down V. You can go to the vert here, and I should be able to tap D and hold down V, then just snap that. But pay attention to everything and make sure everything's actually snapping to the grid. If you make sure everything snaps in here, Then once you push to Unreal, then you're going to get predictable results inside of Unreal, and you're going to be able to have your modular parts and pieces. Now, this is only for this big, I'm just treating it as one big giant chunk. Now that I know that this all kind of snaps and I've got a flat and I've got curves going out and in like that, and I can make my endless pieces, now it's time for me to start dissecting this model and saying like, well, do I want to grab individual boards from this? Do I want to have the crown part, the wall? So after I make sure everything's working, then I could separate all the parts again and get really granular with that. Then that way you've got a really true modular set. And if I wanted to do two of these planks pushed up here, I can snap that together on there. The other thing that I might suggest to you is that these pieces, if you do make them snap to grid increments, Unreal can go down to at least 1 unit for snapping. So it gives you a whole lot of options for, different sizes and things like that. So you can get pretty granular with how small things are for snapping. And if you make sure your parts and pieces that you want to snap together at least hit at some part on one part of the grid, you're going to get parts and pieces that can make a whole bunch of different combinations and everything else like that. And they'll always be able to snap together in some form or fashion like that. Okay. So that is a pretty good look at the different techniques that I found for being able to do these corner pieces. And hopefully that helps you out. I was really banging my head against this. I was trying to do a bunch of Boolean operations and everything else, and it was just kind of failing. And so I found these 3 different options, and I think it should get you through most situations. If something fails on you, you've got a couple different methods to get the job done. All right, now that I got all my geometry created, it's time to start pushing these results into Unreal. One thing that I should note is that during this process of making these parts here, where I've got the turn in and turn out corners and then this pillar, you can see I actually used a grayscale version of the texture that I kicked out. So I wanted to show you in Substance Painter, you probably know this, but just in case, getting your textures out. So File, Export Textures, you can go to this area, and then you can see there's a location where you can spit out the textures where you want those to go. And then I'm using the output template Unreal Engine 4 Packed. And if you look at this template that they've got, you scroll down, you can go to Unreal Engine Packed 4. You can see it's going to do some coding on here that's going to give you the mesh name, the texture set, and then it's going to tell you this is base color. And then on this one's an important one's in a packed map. So it's got occlusion first, then roughness, and then metallic. And then we got a normal map on here. And then on this one, if you wanted to do emissive, you could do emissive on there. I don't have any emissive on there, so don't really have to worry about that. So I can choose the location of where I'm going to spit this thing out. And if I go ahead and do this, let me just find the area where I'm pushing this stuff out. I like to make a folder called Substance Painter, and then maybe some kind of folder called Texture Export, something like that. And I'll just select the folder. So now it's ready to be pushed in there. So let's go ahead and click Export. It'll export the textures out. You can actually, when it's done, click this output directory, and then you can actually see the textures that are made from that right there, right? So in Maya, I just mapped that color map to a Lambert, and it was just a little bit difficult to see, so that's why I did some changes to it. So that was going to get the texture out. Let's hop on over to Maya, and you can take a look at the material for this. If I hit Control A and I bring this up, you can see I actually used a blend for this. So you can select any object that you got in object mode, right click on it, and you can say assign a new material, or you can use this assign favorite materials. So I just assigned a blend to it like that. And then I mapped, you can see this icon has changed. I mapped it to a color file. So if I just did one of these real quick, let's just do incandescence. You can see this comes up, and then you would be able to choose a file node. After that, then you just navigate to where your texture sits. So what I did on this, I actually did a remap of the color information, and you can do that with a color node on here. If I go to Windows and I go to Rendering Editors and then do Hypershade, and we can actually take a look at the texture for this. This was the actual texture that was put in here for this. And then I'm not sure if it was this color remap.
as where, yeah, that's the area that I plugged into that in this area, the color remap. So double click on that to get back to it. So that's where I was able to do this. It just gives you a really simple grid. And I was kind of doing some stuff like that. And then I think I took the overall color balance and then reduced any of the saturation that was going on to it. So you don't have to do that. You can do that inside of Photoshop, but it was just becoming a little bit distracting for me to see everything that was going on with it. The other thing that I had going on with this is I took the specular color and I reduced that down to where there was no specular on the model whatsoever. Okay, so they gave me more of this like flat representation of things, and it just made it a little bit easier at this stage to see what was going on. Okay, so the next part is after these are built, pushing them to Unreal. So I chose to do this thing. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but then if I had this group node, the group node was actually giving me this location for this right here at the 00 world origin. Then this pivot point here out to the side, if I export from the group, it's going to take this pivot point information from that. Now, even if I put this on the model here, I do believe Unreal is going to have an issue with that. If I really wanted this to be at the world origin like this and come in Unreal, I need to have the model put in this position. So I just held on X and then snap to the grid for that. But I'm actually just going to keep this the way I've got it inside of Maya. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this and export that out. So I've already exported this part out. I was doing a little test to see what this looks like. But to export these parts out, what I should do is zero this thing out, and I can zero these things out. And then that's where I would export these parts and these pieces out like this. Okay. So for this, I'm going to actually zero everything out. And I would take this and go modify, reset transformations. That's going to give me my pivot point right at the 00 location of the world. And then I can export this thing out. Okay. So I've already exported this out before. I can do it again. I'll say File, Export, Selection. And we've got the FBX file type for that. And if I go to the example content that I pushed out, these are my game parts. I've already exported it out. In order for me to show you the import options into Unreal, I'm going to just call this like version 2, like that. Okay, I did want to show you that I want the normal information from Maya to come over to Unreal. So I'm going to use the smoothing groups, tangents, and binormals. I'll put the smooth mesh on, and yeah, that's mainly what I'm concerned about. So I'll just go ahead and click export for that. And then I'm going to hop on over to Unreal. So I've already set this up. I'm going to show you the options that were used to get this inside of here. So if I right click in this area, I do think it's important under content, I just made a new thing called trim sheets. And then I made a folder for it called materials, meshes, and textures. So try to be organized with your stuff, just like they do in Unreal. If you take a look at their content, you're going to see that a lot. So in the meshes area, I can go ahead and I can right click and say import to game. So I'm going to get this number 2 version here. I'm going to go ahead and hit open for this. And I wanted to show you, I don't want it to build nanite. You can change this after the fact if you accidentally forget not to put this on there. It was causing some weird odd shading, and we're not using nanite for this. So I'm just going to turn that off. If you want vertex color to come in with that, you can put that on replace for that. But what I want to do is this normal import method. I want to put that on import normals and tangents, and that should give me everything that I'm looking at inside of Maya. Should give me the same thing for that. If you've got multiple FBXs that you imported in, you could have multiple FBXs like in a folder. You export that to an FBX file. It will separate them out into multiple pieces like this. But if you want that to actually join it, use this combine meshes option for that. So I'm going to click import all, and it should make this new pillar for me. Okay, so this is probably what you would look at whenever you first import your thing in, right? It's going to have this default Unreal material on there. And I'm just going to close that up. So what I would do is I would get a material made and get it going. So if you just right click on here and you go add material, and you just call this M underscore, this is wall trim version 2, like this. Let's do that. I'll double click this to open this up and through here. And as I imported the textures in, go to the textures area, you can just right click on that and say import game textures. And if I go back out to this area for Substance Painter, we looked at that texture folder. You just select your files like this and then import it in. It should recognize that you've got a normal map, and it's probably going to give you some kind of warning saying that it's converted this to a normal map. That's completely fine. The only thing that you need to do is for this pack maps, whenever you're packing maps together, you want this to be in linear color space. You don't want the values to get kind of messed up. If you don't understand what linear color space is, it's basically a difference for the way that the computer or the monitors draws information for you. And for like color maps and things like that, you want that to be on sRGB. But for anything that's in linear space that goes from 0 to 1, like our metal rough system, you want to turn this sRGB off for that and go ahead and save that like that. And then now we've got our 3 different textures that you got. You can just select them, hold down Shift and add selection to this. Go ahead and click and drag it into here. And then you can just kind of rearrange this. I'm going to take this RGB, plug it into the base color, take the RGB for the normal map, and then go to normal. And then on this one, that pack maps, not really sure why the direction goes this way, but if you plug in red into ambient occlusion, you got ambient occlusion, green into roughness, and then metallic. So everything's kind of flipped basically. And then that's going to give you everything that you need. It is possible that you can take one of your meshes that you're importing in and you can click it and you can click on this little icon here and it'll replace that shader ball with your actual piece of geometry that you're using. So you can actually see while you're building the material, you can see the results of that. If you hold down L and then click, it'll rotate the light around for you. So I can go ahead and save that. So that's what I did with this. I actually made a material instance. I didn't really do anything with the material instance, but I like to do that. That way, if I do anything and add parameters to stuff, then I can get that going. So with the mesh, I'll go ahead and open that up. And then what I like to do is take the material instance that I create for it, and then I fill that directly into this. So anytime I drag it out into the world, should have the material on there for us. Okay. So now we can take the mesh, we can drag it out into the world, and then we can start working with it and manipulating it. And I think what I had for this was set to like -10, I believe. Nope, these are at 4. Okay, so 4 like this, and now you can hold down Alt and then drag out copies of this, and then take a look at it that way. Let me just show you a real quick thing about this material instance. So on the parent material, if I wanted to do anything where I was altering some of this, what I could do is maybe I wanted to darken the color texture, right? So if I tap M for multiply, I can feed the RGB into this slot, and then I can feed this into base color. And then now I can right click on here and say promote to parameter. So that's one way of getting a scalar value. That is a parameter. So if you make a parameter in the material instance, you can actually tune this stuff. So I'll just call this color darken like this. Okay. And if you want to give it a group, and if you want that to show up and like you always want to see everything that's related to base color in one area, you can do that. There we go. Finally got it. Okay, so we got base color. And then if you multiply something by 1, it'll give you the same exact results that you had before. Okay, so now I've got some kind of way of tuning the lightness and the darkness of this. We'll see in just a second what that looks like. And then now for this, if I want to tune my roughness value, I can do M. I'll do another multiply for my roughness value, and I'll plug the slot. This one I'll do B because it's running up like this, and I'll plug that into roughness like this. Then I can hold down 1 and tap, and that'll give me a scalar value. And if I want to right click, I can convert that to parameter. So let me call this roughness value. Let's just do that. I'll just make it 1. Again, if you multiply something by 1, it's not going to change the numbers at all. And so that will at least give us something to kind of play around with. So let's go ahead and save that. I forgot to do this part right here, and then I'll just make this group rough like that. Save it. Okay, so now we can see in the world. Now if we double click on the material instance, and I'll push this over here just a little bit so we can see what's going on. Like that. I can turn these on now, and then this will give me the ability to darken. So if I make a lower value, you can see that it's going to darken the overall value of everything, and I can push that all the way till it goes basically to 0. So that's as dark as that texture is going to go. We've basically made it pure black at that time, like that, right? I can put this up to 1, just like this, and then this roughness value, if I start to play around with that, if I push a roughness value down, it's multiplying it and it's starting to make it more of a glossy value. Then if I push it this direction, it's going to make it more matte. So it's really only going to go up to a certain value for these things. If you really crank it, we can do something like that. So now it's got the appearance of it's maybe wet and glistening. So it's just going to give you some additional control. What I would say is what you're probably going to end up doing is finding that maybe the values from Substance Painter are just a little bit too glossy for you. So you could just kind of knock that back just a little bit and just have some type of control for that ever so slightly. I'll show you one more node real quick. You can always go back to the parent material and add more functionality to things. So I'm going to right click on here and do a desat. Yeah, like that, desaturation node. So I'm going to feed this into this slot and then put this right back here on the base color like that. And so I got this desaturation, and then I can right click and promote to parameter on this. And I'll just call this desat value like that. There we go. And right now, if I put that up to like 1, it'll completely desaturate it. And if it's at 0, it's not doing anything. So let's put 0 as the default. So then that way we can kind of tune it. Okay. So now I've got another control that I put on there, and I probably should have put this at group base color like that. I'll just go ahead and save it real quick. And then now again, I've got controls to where I can desaturate this thing a little bit, and then I could actually even darken the value of it. So I've got some ability to tune and control this information. So if I get rid of this one, I'll just go ahead and save that real quick. You can see what we got on this one here. Now, what's going on with these pillars is they actually have the parent material and not the material instance that is applied to it. So that's why it's not getting those changes. But I'm just going to actually revert this and change it back to our default values, then save that, and then get rid of that. Okay. So that's a little bit about how I push this stuff in here, and just tried some of these things out. I put some different lights in here and gave a player start. And if I hit Alt P, I can play, and hit F11 to go into full screen mode, and then just test this out in through here. So that's a look at everything that I set up for this section to try to figure out some of the wall trim. It's not an exhaustive list of everything, but it's some of the issues that I hit. And hopefully by me sharing this information, it's going to help you out and get you on the road to where you can start building your own trim sheets.